World War II. While bombs were falling over London, he sat in a small room, listening to the whisper of machines, a language only he could understand. And in his mind, there was only one thought: to take revenge on those who had disrupted peace. He wanted to strike back at the German invaders. Today, I will tell you the story of a great man, a legendary figure, Alan Turing. How he managed to create something that helped end the war much faster and saved countless lives. The fog, heavy and viscous, like the breath of war itself, creeps across the plains of Buckinghamshire. Night in Bletchley Park resembles an endless chess match between light and shadow. Sparse lanterns, muffled footsteps of a sentry, somewhere beyond the trees. A dog's bark and the distant rumble of trains heading into the unknown. In one of the rooms, whose window barely reveals the world, a man sits. On the desk, a pile of papers, a cup of cold coffee, a stack of punch cards, like a deck of fate. The world outside burns, but here, only the whisper of machines and the rhythm of pencil on paper. His name is Alan Turing. He doesn't look like a hero, but like a man who's lived too long inside his own mind. His hand trembles, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of thought. Before him, an endless sequence of numbers, symbols, electric impulses, and all of it, a riddle capable of drowning empires. While sirens thunder in the sky and London sleeps to the sound of bombings, he listens, not to silence. He listens to the noise of logic, the clicking of relays, brief flashes of light, the crackle of contacts. To most, noise. To him, a language. The enemy's language, encrypted by a machine named Enigma. Every morning, hundreds of British sailors sink to the bottom of the Atlantic because the German fleet knows their route. Every morning, thousands of codes go out into the ether, and no human can read them. No one, except perhaps this quiet, awkward genius who believes that thought can be sharper than a weapon. In the dim light of a desk lamp, Turing moves his fingers across the typewriter keys like a pianist. He's not just writing, he's listening to patterns being born. Somewhere deep in his consciousness, the first thought begins to form. If the enemy entrusted his secret to a machine, then only another machine can unravel it. He closes his eyes. Before him is not paper, but a labyrinth. Thousands of combinations, millions of possible routes. But in each of them, logic, even if hidden. And if there is logic, there is a path. On the wall hangs a map of the Atlantic. Tiny flags, sights of sunken convoys. Each flag a drowned life, each dot another attempt to find meaning in chaos. He looks at the map and thinks, if I'm late by one day, hundreds will die. If I'm on time, no one will know I saved them. This thought isn't heroic. It's simply cold, like the metal machines are made of. He doesn't dream of awards, doesn't seek glory. He simply cannot stop, because he sees patterns where others see madness. From the corridor comes the soft sound of footsteps. The sentry passes by, the fog stirs outside the window. And in his mind, the gears are already beginning to turn. He sees an imagined device, vast, humming, alive. Hundreds of drums spin in sync, thousands of contacts connect, and somewhere amid the electric noise, a thought begins to sound. He whispers almost inaudibly, as if sharing a secret with time itself. Only a machine can deceive a machine. This phrase hangs in the air like a soundless shot. And in that moment, even before he creates what will later be called the bomb, the world is already beginning to change. While others fight on land, sea, and in the sky, he begins a war within the mind itself, a war where the weapon will be an idea. The lamp flickers. The coffee is cold. He takes a new sheet of paper and begins to write. The first formulas, the first diagrams, the first lines of an algorithm that one day will save millions. But for now, it's just a man and numbers, and the whisper of machines, like the breath of God. Vtora Chast Europe no longer breathes. It encodes the air. Every day, millions of signals echo through the ether, each one the voice of war, encrypted by the German enigma. As if reality itself has become a secret, hidden behind 6 rotors and endless combinations. The cipher changes every morning, as though someone rewrites the logic of the world anew each night. British sailors call the Atlantic a grave without crosses. The waves carry wreckage, letters that will never reach their recipients, and screams dissolved in the wind. German submarines operate with almost supernatural precision. They know where the convoy will be, on what day, at what hour, as if someone whispers coordinates to them straight from the sky. In truth, that whisper comes from machines, small, neat, soulless. Enigma, an engineering marvel turned monster. Each one, like a separate brain, hidden in a box with a keyboard. Every keystroke creates a new universe of symbols, where the word attack becomes a random sequence of letters, and no one but the holder of the key can read its meaning. To the Germans, Enigma is a symbol of brilliance and control. To the Allies, a nightmare unraveling the world. And every day, that nightmare devours lives. Submarines sink convoys carrying food, ammunition, medicine. Britain begins to suffocate. Each new Admiralty report, like a death sentence. Ministries gather for meetings. The map of Europe reddens as if infected. And somewhere in those rooms, among generals, lords, and ministers, someone speaks words that sound like madness. We cannot win this war with guns. We must win it with numbers. Thus enters Bletchley Park, a place that officially does not exist. A former estate turned into a secret laboratory, where instead of explosions, there is only the rustle of paper and the clatter of teletypes. Here, Britain gathers its strangest minds. Mathematicians, philologists, chess players, even crossword solvers. People the world usually calls eccentrics. Now they are the last hope for saving civilization. Each morning they decipher intercepted radio messages. Each night they try to calculate the key that changes as the clock's hand completes its circle. A key that exists for only 24 hours, and if they don't make it in time, it vanishes forever. Enigma is not just complex. It mocks the human mind. Its combinations, trillions of possibilities, and even if Britain had 100 years, it wouldn't be enough. But time slips away not in days, in hours. On the wall of headquarters hangs a poster. Loose lips sink ships. But now, it's the numbers themselves that have become talkative. And somewhere deep within this digital war, a faint crackle is already heard. The sound from which a new weapon will be born. Logic. London burns. People live in basements, and the rhythm of Enigma still pulses through the air. Beautiful, precise, dispassionate. Each click like the beat of a death metronome. And somewhere amid this chaos, a man appears who decides not to listen to orders, but to listen to the code itself. His name is Alan Turing. And while most people see Enigma as an impenetrable wall, he sees a pattern, not a miracle, not mysticism, a structure. To him, chaos is simply order that hasn't yet been described by a formula. He doesn't know the war will last for many more years, doesn't know the world will forget his name, but he knows one thing. If there exists a machine capable of encrypting reality, then another can be built, one that will understand it. Tretja Chast. He was never like the others. He didn't play football, didn't know what to say to neighbors, and was always late. Not because he forgot, but because he stopped to watch how a raindrop shattered against a stone. His world wasn't made of faces and names. It was made of patterns, things, sounds, events. Everything arranged itself into strange symmetries that no one else noticed. Young Alan Turing grew up in a house where silence spoke louder than words. His father wanted him to become a civil servant, a profession with order. His mother dreamed of a son who would smile at formal dinners. But their child loved numbers most of all. Not for a career, for their beauty. One day a teacher asked, "Why aren't you listening?" Turing looked up and quietly replied, "I am listening, just not to what you're saying." And indeed, he was listening to the world whispering formulas. School was torture. Classmates laughed, called him the crazy mathematician. He didn't understand hierarchies, didn't know how to be normal. But one day he understood how a pendulum moves without seeing a clock, how an apple falls if the air is denser, and how numbers can tell a story if you listen to them properly. He fell in love for the first time, not with a person, but with an idea. The idea that any complexity in the world could be reduced to simple, logical steps. His notebooks weren't just equations, they were maps of a new world. A world where everything could be understood if you asked the right question. But one day, he did fall in love. A boy named Christopher Morcom. The first person who saw not a strange boy, but a mind full of sincere light. They solved problems together, argued, dreamed. Christopher said, "Numbers are like stars. If you connect them, you can see something beautiful." But one day, Christopher died, suddenly, from illness. That day changed everything. Turing was silent for a long time, then simply sat down and began to write. He didn't believe consciousness dies. He believed it could be recreated. That the mind is a structure, a system, a pattern of signals. That if you understand how thought works, you can bring back those you've lost. From that moment, something fearless and tragic appeared in him. He stopped fearing loneliness. It became his laboratory. He stopped seeking approval. He began seeking truth. And while the world saw him as strange, he was already designing the future. Cambridge became his refuge. There he was among those who could argue with logic, but respected it. Turing became a student who saw not only equations, but what lay behind them. He wrote his first papers on computable numbers, and didn't yet know they would become the foundation of modern computer science. He didn't look like a war hero. He didn't wear a uniform, didn't carry a weapon, but in his mind, a battle was already underway between infinity and order. And when the world plunged into the chaos of World War II, this strange, awkward man with a delayed smile turned out to be the only one who understood that to defeat madness, you must understand its structure. And when he was invited to Bletchley Park, he didn't ask how much he'd be paid. He asked, "Will we have access to machines?" There, among wires and paper, he finally felt at home. The world he had always been separated from suddenly needed his strangeness. He didn't fit into society, but he fit perfectly into the chaos of war. Chetvortaya Chatst. If you turn off the main road that leads north from London and drive a couple of miles through damp fogs and ancient oaks, a view suddenly opens that doesn't resemble the heart of a military empire. An ordinary estate, brick walls, a moss-covered roof, a lake where ducks glide. No guard towers, no soldiers, no danger signs. Just a small sign that reads, Bletchley Park, no admittance to unauthorized persons. If you didn't know, you'd think some eccentric aristocrat lived here, or a keeper of ancient books. But as you come closer, you hear a strange hum. It comes from within, from the depths of the manor. Not the noise of voices, not the stomp of boots, but a steady, unceasing pulse, like a heartbeat. Inside this seemingly peaceful place beats the heart of a war whose existence even generals don't know. Thousands of sheets of paper, miles of wires, the clatter of typewriters, the ring of bells signaling a new interception. Each room, a separate universe. In one, mathematicians argue until hoarse. In another, wrens carry radiograms, unaware that they contain the fate of hundreds of ships. Bletchley lives in total secrecy. No one knows what these people do. They cannot speak to friends or family. Everything that happens within these walls stays here, buried under layers of stamps and oaths. And yet, in this silence beats the true rhythm of war. Turing arrives at the park not as a commander, but as a man who sees system in chaos. He speaks briefly, strangely, often loses the thread of conversation. Some laugh, some get annoyed, but when he picks up chalk and walks to the board, the silence thickens. He begins to sketch formulas, then stops, steps back, and suddenly connects lines that no one before him dared to connect. His ideas sound insane. We need a machine that will think like a cipher. Colleagues exchange glances. You want metal to think? He calmly replies, No, I want it to search for meaning. Not everyone supports him. Many prefer the old methods, manual decryptions, logic tables, educated guesses. But war doesn't wait for guesses. Every day, new codes, new lives depending on the next broken message. Turing gathers around him a team as strange as he is. Gordon Welchman, a stern mathematician with military bearing. Joan Clark, a quiet, brilliant woman who solves equations faster than men can write them down. Young analysts, students, chess players, even musicians. Each sees logic in their own way, and together they create a mess that unexpectedly begins to work. They live in small rooms, eat in haste, drink tea that's long gone cold, and go without sleep for 3 days at a time. But when a message suddenly breaks, the whole room erupts in joy. And for a moment they feel they've come closer to understanding. Sometimes the military visits. They look at the disorder, crumbs, papers, gears, wires, and they frown. Is this a lab or a junkyard? Turing replies calmly, It's a place where chaos thinks about order. He doesn't try to be a leader. He simply infects others with the idea. There's no pomp in his voice, only certainty that all this is not in vain. He knows, out there at sea, people live or die because of the numbers flashing on their teletypes. Each letter, a pulse. Each mistake, death. Sometimes at night, when everyone is asleep, he stays in the lab alone, sits before the schematic of a future machine, hears the rain tapping on the roof, and whispers to himself, If only they knew how beautifully it's all arranged. Bletchley becomes his universe. Outside, war. Here, thought versus chaos. And every day, he and his team try to peer into the abyss of enigma before it peers into them. Pataya Chast. Bletchley Park was full of noise. Teletypes clattered, people rushed around with sheets of paper. Some argued, some collapsed from exhaustion right at their desks. But in one room, numbered hut 8, a different sound reigned. Not shouting, not footsteps, but mechanical breathing. There, among cables, charts, and tobacco smoke, sat a man trying to understand how metal thinks. Turing. He didn't look like a prophet, more like a weary lecturer who had accidentally ended up in hell and decided to bring order to it. Before him, sheets covered in formulas. In the margins, diagrams where lines bend, connect, disappear. He wasn't drawing, he was thinking. If Enigma is a machine, then it follows rules, and if it has rules, it can be tricked by logic. It sounds simple, almost naive, but in it, a revolution. The world was used to believing that only humans could think. Turing said the opposite. Thinking is a process, and it can be reproduced. Just as fire was once turned into an engine, so too can reason be turned into a schematic. His colleagues listened and didn't believe. "You want a machine to think?" He nodded. "No, I want it to do what the brain does, faster and more precisely." He explained that Enigma couldn't be cracked by hand. Metal had to be made to think for man. Instead of going through combinations one by one, he wanted to create a mechanical mind that could process millions of possibilities per minute. A machine that doesn't tire, doesn't doubt, doesn't sleep. This was more than an engineering idea. It was a challenge to nature itself. He didn't just want to break the code. He wanted to understand the very principle of thought. If Enigma was the heart of the war, then he intended to build the brain that would stop it. His colleagues argued. Some called his idea madness. "Metal doesn't think, Turing. It just turns gears." He smirked, barely looking up. "Doesn't our brain do the same?" He drew a diagram on the board. Circles, like neurons. Lines, like connections. He explained, if a machine can store and apply information by rules, then it can solve problems. And if it solves, then it thinks. They listened. Not all understood. But something shifted in the air, as if someone had spoken aloud what humanity had always feared to even imagine. This idea was dangerous, not to the enemy, but to a world that considered itself the pinnacle of reason. And yet, Turing pressed on. He drafted algorithms, sketched devices with rotors and drums that would work in place of thousands of people. Machines capable of catching patterns the human brain simply couldn't see in time. One night, late, he walked to the window. Outside, rain, the hum of aircraft, a red sky over London. He looked into the darkness and whispered to himself, "If man created a machine that encrypts meaning, then man can create one that brings it back." The next day, he entered the office of his superiors with something that resembled the blueprint of a musical instrument. Wires, wheels, lamps, contacts. But instead of sound, it was meant to produce understanding. When asked, "What is this?" he calmly replied, "It's a machine that will listen for us." No one knew then that this phrase marked the beginning of a new era. An era where thought would no longer be a human monopoly, where from the roar of war, not weapons, but intelligence would be born. Shesta Chast. The world doesn't like those who think faster than it does. When Turing brought the blueprints for his machine, the officers looked at them as if he had proposed building a perpetual motion device out of a teapot and wires. On their desks lay reports, maps, losses, reality measured in blood. And he spoke of gears, of logic, of thoughts that could be turned into metal. "You want to win the war? With calculations?" asked one colonel, politely but with a smirk. "Yes," Turing replied. "And if it doesn't work?" then we'll lose faster." His dry confidence irritated them. The generals didn't see a savior in him, but a crank. They wanted plans, orders, decisive action, and he spoke of a machine that would think for man. Someone even said, "While you calculate, we're losing ships." It was then he realized for the first time, his enemy wasn't just enigma, his enemy was time. He wandered through Bletchley, watching people work around the clock. Tired eyes, ink-stained fingers, piles of intercepts. He knew all these efforts were useless if they didn't build something that could work without sleep. A machine that doesn't make mistakes. But to build it, he needed what he didn't have. Money, parts, engineers, and most of all, the trust of the leadership. And that was exactly what he lacked. He wrote letters, reports, requests. In return, silence, bureaucratic deafness. War doesn't like investing in dreams. So Turing decided to act on his own. He went to Ernest Newman, an engineer with experience in radar. Explained the idea, sketched a diagram on a sheet. Hundreds of drums, thousands of contacts. Newman was silent, then said, "You realize this can't be built in a year. Then we'll build it in 6 months." He began to fight for materials. Wire, steel, electric motors, relays. Every piece of copper, a victory. Every bureaucrat's signature, a small assault. Bletchley Park turned into a strange place where mathematics battled logistics. Scientists argued with military men, engineers with economists. Turing walked among them, tired, angry, stubborn. He barely slept, ate standing up, wrote formulas directly on the wallpaper. People called him a weirdo, but when he spoke, they listened. Because even through his distractedness, one thing was clear. He knew what he was doing, and still the pressure grew. Every day, new reports of sunken ships. Every day, new codes. The newspapers wrote about the heroism of pilots, while the real heroes sat in rooms that smelled of dust and electricity. One night, he sat on the floor among blueprints. The machine on paper was nearly ready, but in reality, no parts, no team. He closed his eyes and heard someone laughing behind the wall. Maybe from despair, maybe from exhaustion. He thought, people laugh at what they don't understand, but when they do, it'll be too late. The next morning, he went to the leadership again. No reports, no explanations. He placed a crumpled sheet of paper on the table and said, "If you don't give me the resources, you'll lose the war. If you do, you'll win it. The choice is simple." Silence filled the room. Everyone understood he wasn't threatening. He was stating a fact. And suddenly someone nodded. Then another. Silently, without applause, Turing received permission. Now he had a workshop, a team, metal, wires, and sleepless nights. Now he could build. He left the office without smiling. Just whispered to himself, "Good, now let the machine think." From that moment, time ceased to be the enemy. It became fuel. Said Maya Chast. On one foggy evening in 1940, while London burned under German bombs and the world seemed wounded to its core, in a modest hangar at Bletchley Park, something else began to be born. A quiet miracle of wires, gears, and human obsession. They called it the bomb. Not in honor of explosions, no. In honor of the sound. A muffled, measured beating that it made when it came to life. A hum, like a heart created not by nature, but by reason. The machine looked intimidating. 3 meters long, a metal casing, rows of spinning drums, each one rotating at furious speed. It didn't glow, didn't sing, didn't threaten, it thought. Each rotation, an attempt to guess Enigma's combination. Each click, a step toward the solution. Turing stood before it, silent, with tired eyes. His fingers trembled as he touched the panel. Not from fear, from awareness. He wasn't looking at the machine. He was looking at an idea made flesh. Start it. The engineers powered it up. The machine shuddered. Sounds ran along its casing, metallic, alive, as if thousands of tiny hearts had begun to beat in unison. At first, chaos. Then, rhythm. That rhythm was mesmerizing. Hundreds of relays clicked, as if someone were tapping out Morse code, but only Turing knew the meaning. He watched the dials, the lights, every change in sound. To everyone else, it was just noise. To him, a song of order. The room filled with the smell of heated metal. Someone asked, "Do you really think it can do it?" Turing replied, "It's already doing what no human can." The first attempts failed. The machine overheated, drums jammed, lamps burned out, calculations collapsed. But he didn't give up. He stood nearby, checked the contacts again and again, repeating, "One more cycle. Let it try again." Nights passed under hum and crackle. The team collapsed from exhaustion, but no one left. They felt this was more than a project. This was the point where the future begins to breathe. Sometimes Turing stayed alone, sat on the floor, leaning against the machine's casing, and listened to it work. The monotonous, relentless rhythm sounded to him like the pulse of the universe. He whispered, "Do you hear it? In every click, an answer. We just have to wait." One night, during one of those vigils, the machine suddenly changed its rhythm. The clicks became slower, steadier. Engineers rushed over. A light lit up on the panel. One, then a second, then a third. Letters lined up on the teletype tape. Not a meaningless jumble, but words. Real, readable, human. The machine had cracked the code. Turing closed his eyes. He didn't smile, didn't shout. He simply exhaled. He knew this was only the beginning, that tomorrow Enigma would change its cipher, that they'd have to start again. But now, for the first time, he saw human thought become a mechanism capable of understanding. He stood before the bomb, like a man hearing the language of a new world for the first time. And somewhere, in the echoing silence of the hangar, everyone understood. This machine wasn't just breaking codes. It was creating an era where reason and metal were no longer separate. Восьмая часть. The morning was grey and heavy, like a wet blanket draped over all of Britain. Bletchley Park was still asleep, but in Hut 8 the lamps were already glowing. Inside, that same low hum like the breath of a beast, and dozens of people staring at panels, tapes, signal lights. Today, a new day, a new cipher, a new attempt. Turing stands by the table, hands in his pockets, gaze focused. On the table, fresh radio intercepts, messages from German submarines, codes behind which death hides. Each radiogram, like a letter rigged with explosives. Each minute, a step closer to catastrophe. "Start it!" The engineer nods. The machine comes alive. The bomb works as if it's singing. Clicks flow evenly. Drums spin in rhythm. Each sound, a possibility. Each vibration, a variant. The room fills with tension, as if the steel itself senses that the fate of not just one operation, but the entire Atlantic front is being decided. Suddenly, a change. The clicks grow quieter. The tempo falters. Someone nervously asks, "Is something wrong?" Turing replies, without taking his eyes off the panel, "On the contrary, I think something matched." One light turns on, then another, then a third. Symbols begin to line up on the paper tape. still meaningless, but with each rotation they grow clearer, as if someone is wiping fog from a mirror. Another minute, and everything falls silent. The printing drum slowly punches out the final line. Turing steps forward, takes the tape, reads aloud, U-264 preparing to attack. Coordinates, Northwest Atlantic. The room freezes. Everyone exchanges glances. This is not just text. This is an enemy message, read for the first time on the same day it was sent. A few hours later, British destroyers change course. The submarine sets up an ambush, but ends up in the path of a torpedo barrage. 1 minute of understanding saves hundreds of lives, and for the first time in a long while, a small, almost invisible blue dot appears on the map of the Atlantic. Not a loss, but a rescue. Turing sits by the window and watches the dawn fade over the rooftops. He doesn't rejoice, doesn't celebrate. He simply knows it worked. His logic, his stubbornness, his machine, now part of the war. From this day forward, the bomb is no longer an experiment. It is a weapon. Each day it deciphers new codes. Each day it saves convoys. Each day it proves intellect can be stronger than artillery. Bletchley Park is no longer just an estate. It is a factory of decisions, the heart of darkness, where meaning is born from noise. Their victories go unseen. The newspapers are silent. But it is they who slowly, invisibly turn the tide of war. At night, when everyone has gone, Turing stays behind again. He sits beside the machine and places his hand on its casing. The metal is warm, alive. He feels a faint vibration beneath his fingers, as if it's not a mechanism, but a heart beating in sync with his own. He whispers, almost inaudibly, "You did it. We did it." But there is no joy in his voice, only unease, because now he understands. Every new day, a new enigma. Every new success, only a postponement of defeat. The machine doesn't tire, but man does. And ahead lie long months of darkness, where even victory will sound not as a shout, but as the whisper of metal. Divare chast. Bletchley Park lived like an organism that had no right to emotion. Each day brought victories, and each one was immediately buried in silence. No fanfare, no newspaper headlines, only new codes, new sheets, new sleepless nights. Every ship saved was a secret, every breakthrough, a mystery that couldn't be spoken aloud. The world outside lived its war, loud, bloody, heroic. But in Bletchley, there was a war without sound. No gunpowder, no explosions. Only the rustle of paper and the clatter of machines, as if logic itself were fighting for humanity. Turing walked down a corridor where the walls were covered in diagrams and punched tape. On the floor, mugs of cold tea, pencils snapped in half. People around him could barely stand, but when the bomb clicked loudly somewhere in the distance, everyone lifted their heads. It was their signal of hope. They didn't know whose lives they were saving, didn't know names, didn't see faces. They simply solved equations, and somewhere far away, convoys changed course and escaped destruction. And no one but them knew why. Sometimes officers came, gave orders dryly, checked reports, but not a word of thanks. Work, results, a signature, that was all. People became numbers, like the very codes they were deciphering. One morning at dawn, Turing sat by the window, watching pale sunlight break through the fog. On the table lay summaries. Operation successful, convoy preserved, no losses. He picked up a sheet, looked at it and thought, "This is the price of silence. We save, but we do not exist." He didn't complain. He simply stayed quiet. Silence became part of his life. Just another formula, like the ones he wrote. Sometimes, when everything was still, he would step outside. Leaves fell onto wet grass, the air smelled of autumn and metal. He felt a strange emptiness. Victory without witnesses felt like defeat. One day someone asked him, "You must be proud of this?" He looked at the person and quietly replied, "Pride is a luxury for those who are seen." The machines hummed. Enigma kept changing its codes, and Bletchley, day after day, night after night, held the line. They no longer tried to catch up. They were ahead. Each morning, as Germany began to encrypt, Bletchley already knew what would be written, but all of it remained under lock and key. Turing received an order: never speak of what you did. Not to friends, not to family, to no one. When the war ended, London rejoiced. Crowds in the streets, flowers, music, kisses, and in Bletchley they simply turned off the lights, one by one. No fanfare, no farewells. The machines stopped. The rooms emptied. Files were burned, reports destroyed, so not a single line would reveal the secret, as if the place itself were being erased from history. Turing stood in the doorway and watched as those who had saved the world were simply dismissed, without a word. He wasn't surprised. He knew that history doesn't love those who speak in whispers, but somewhere deep in his soul, he felt everything was just beginning, because the real war for him wasn't over. Now he would have to fight not machines, but people. Those who didn't understand that sometimes genius doesn't shout, it ticks like a clock. Desata Chast. After the war, Bletchley Park stood empty, like a theater after the final act. The audience applauded, but the actors were gone. Their names vanished from documents, their work from history. The world celebrated victory, but those who made it possible sat at home, in solitude, without medals, without gratitude. Alan Turing walked the streets of Manchester, where people laughed, traded, loved, unaware they were passing by the man who had saved them all. He was working again, now at the university, teaching, writing papers, building new models of computation. His mind still boiled with ideas, machines that could learn, programs capable of reasoning, networks resembling the human brain. He dreamed of a future where thought would be universal, not confined to the body. But the world wasn't ready for such dreams. It began to fear what it didn't understand. Turing once again found himself an outsider, this time in the country he had saved. He didn't hide who he was. He loved men and didn't consider it shameful. But for 1950s Britain, it was a crime. By law, irrational and cold, his life was turned into evidence of guilt. One morning, the police came to his house. An ordinary day, an ordinary door, and suddenly, a search, an interrogation, cold stares. The charge, gross indecency. Not espionage, not treason, but love, turned into a criminal offense. The trial was brief. The newspapers didn't write about his genius, but about the moral degradation of a scientist. Turing stood before judges who had no idea that this man once broke the enemy's codes, while they themselves hid in basements from bombs. He was given a choice: prison or chemical therapy. He chose the latter. The irony, the man who created intelligence was now forced to destroy his own. Hormone injections. His body began to change, his voice to break. His mind remained sharp, but his heart slowly dimmed. He still wrote formulas, still dreamed of machines that might one day think and feel. But now, something new appeared in his notes. Fatigue. He still came to the lab, smiled at students, cracked jokes. But his eyes betrayed that silence had already begun inside. Not the silence of a genius seeking a solution, but the silence of a man no longer allowed to speak. One day, he wrote in a letter to a friend, "I feel like I'm living inside an equation that's destroying itself." And it was true. He had always been able to solve any problem except one, the human one. The world to which he had given a future denied him a present. And if once he was haunted by enigma, now his enemy was the state that could not forgive him his humanity. In June 1954, they found silence in his home. On the table, an apple bitten on one side. On the floor, a note covered in formulas, and nothing more. The newspapers wrote, "A brilliant mathematician died under mysterious circumstances." 12 часть. All that remained of him, a few notebooks, a couple of machines, and a handful of formulas no one understood at the time. They gathered dust in archives, like the meaningless scribbles of a madman, while the world moved on, building atomic bombs, launching rockets, measuring progress in decibels and megatons. But somewhere deep down, in laboratories, in universities, in basements, his formulas continued to live. Turing's silence didn't vanish. It hummed, quietly, steadily, like a low current beneath the skin of time. Years passed. The world entered a new era, the age of machines. Computers that once fit on a desk now filled entire buildings. And every engineer, programmer, mathematician, opening a book that explained the word algorithm, didn't know they were reading a language written by his hand. He was gone, but his ideas remained. They became the bones of the digital world. Every program, every code, every line, an echo of his thinking. His theory of a machine that learns became more than mathematics. It became humanity's memory. People, unknowingly, began to realize his dream. They created the first neural networks, learning algorithms, computers that could recognize patterns, make decisions, predict, think. All of them were born from a single formula, where once in Turing's hand it was written, "Thought can be reproduced." But recognition came late, too late. When the world finally understood who he was no longer there. Only photographs remained. A man with sad eyes who doesn't look at the camera, but through it, toward where logic begins. In the 1960s, his name began to be spoken again. In the 70s, articles were published. In the 80s, computers were built that bore his name. And then came the Turing test, the first question to a machine. Can it convince a human that it is alive? It wasn't a test for machines. It was a test for us. Because if artificial intelligence can speak like a human, then humans aren't the only ones who think. And that means Turing was right. The world that didn't understand him suddenly began to live by his laws. Every screen, every system, every algorithm that helps, saves, chooses, they are all children of his thought. And in the museum where his bombe now stands, it still hums, slowly spins its drums, clicks its relays, as if remembering how once man and machine spoke the same language. Visitors watch, smile, but they don't hear the most important thing. Beneath that hum, a quiet, steady sound that hasn't faded since those days. It's not metal, not a motor. It's the echo of thought, still flowing through every microchip, every code, every heart. And somewhere, perhaps at the other end of time, he still sits in his room, with a cup of cold coffee, listening to how numbers whisper meaning. 12 часть. The story of Alan Turing is not just a biography. It is a parable about a man who dared to ask the universe, what if reason is not a gift, but an equation? And in that question, not in the answer, was born the era we now live in. He wasn't a soldier, but he fought a war. He wasn't a warrior, but he won. And he didn't become a legend until the world caught up with his thoughts. His life is proof that sometimes, to change everything, you simply have to believe in the impossible. He wanted to build a machine that thinks, but he created something greater, a mirror. Every computer we use, every algorithm, every line of code is a reflection of ourselves. Machines don't do what we tell them to. They do what we are. They learn like children, make mistakes like humans, and ask the same questions that once tormented him. What does it mean to think? What does it mean to feel? When Turing wrote his formulas, he wasn't trying to become a god. He simply wanted to understand whether reason could be explained. And in explaining it, he accidentally revealed that the essence of humanity lies in the desire to understand. Today, when artificial intelligence speaks to us, we rarely remember where it all began. But every time a machine responds, every time it learns, somewhere deep in that dialogue, his voice echoes. Not professorial, not loud. Quiet, thoughtful, weary. That same whisper of numbers he once heard in Bletchley Park, among rain, paper, and lamps. The world often forgets its heroes, but not Turing. Because he didn't just save lives, he saved the very idea of thinking. He proved that reason can be transferred, but the soul only understood. His story doesn't end in death, but in continuation. It lives on in every screen, in every voice, in every algorithm that searches for meaning. And if you listen closely, you can still hear that sound that once changed humanity. A steady, confident, almost living click of a machine that for the first time in history understood a human. And somewhere, in the fog, in a room lit by a single lamp, sits a man in a worn-out suit, and watching the spinning drums, he smiles. He no longer argues with the world. He has solved it.